Angie.
I'm Walter.
And I'm Luke, and today we're going to be talking about how are the negative and positive effects of Juul being communicated among the Rollins College students on Instagram. So first we want to lay down, what is Juul? Juul is obviously an e-cigarette. It's shaped like a USB drive, kind of. It's obviously become the most popular of the smoking devices, definitely amongst the millennial generation especially. They offer a variety of flavors, and these Juul pods contain about 5% nicotine, which is kind of a lot compared to what a cigarette, like an average normal cigarette, it contains.
As for problem statement, it was unclear as whether the negative and positive impacts of Juuls has on people are being communicated effectively. So that's why we decided to do this research project to gain a better understanding of the communication effects of Juuls on Instagram among the Rollins College students.
So in regards to the perceptions of Juul and e-cigarettes in general, we found a couple research sources that we decided to present in this presentation. So the first one is basically saying that the e-cigarettes is an alternative to the traditional cigarettes according to young adults, and really this they just have a lack of knowledge as to what e-cigarettes or even Juul is. So they believe that they're an alternative to traditional cigarettes because they are a facilitated transition, acquisition of the habit, a reminder of the pleasures of smoking, and also there's a social attractiveness to smoking. And the second resource that we have found is really talking about there's a 43% of the students that were being studied from California high school. They believe that e-cigarettes are better compared to traditional cigarettes in regards to health. And then the rest of them either believe that e-cigarettes are not a tobacco product, or they're used as a temporary alternative to traditional cigarettes. So really, based on these two sources, there's obviously a lack of knowledge, and there's not a full understanding as to what e-cigarettes really are.
As for the next category that we decide to work on is Juul and college students, more specifically with the Rollins College students. We found out, and as the CDC mentioned in their website, that tobacco use remains the single largest preventable cause of death disease in the United States. So in order to find and develop a better plan to help individuals who consume tobacco quit tobacco or find a better option to that, the Juul company developed a better and healthier option than smoking e-cigarettes. And also another research showed that Juuls have quickly gained popularity among college students as they are seen as an accessory that is small, cool, and with a variety of flavors. And also another study showed that the popular use of Juul among college students is now becoming an epidemic, and that almost every single student at any college campus dorms are using it, not because maybe they are tobacco consumers, but just because it's something that is perceived as cool by other college students.
So we had two research questions. The first one is, do Rollins College students communicate about the effects of Juul on Instagram? And second is, do Rollins College students see peers communicate about the effects of Juul on Instagram?
As for a methodology, our research was both qualitative research and quantitative. For the qualitative component, we use interviews, and in that case, we interview a staff from the Wellness Center here at Rollins College. Then for the recruitment part, we send an email recruitment where we explain who we are and what was the purpose of our research. And then in that case, we only interview one staff at the Rollins College Wellness Center. And then for the quantitative analysis, we use surveys. In this case, it was an online recruitment, and our target population was the students, and we got 30 people responded to our survey. As for the interview results, which was the staff from the Wellness Center at Rollins College, there were two categories that seemed to be the ones that surround about the Juul topic, and those were perception and communication. As per the perception, the Wellness Center Rollins College staff mentioned that students are definitely not aware of Juul being a nicotine-based e-cigarette, and that consumers do not see downsides to using Juul. And as for the communication component, the interview that showed that communication is most likely to happen through social media rather than in face-to-face communication, and that there's no communication between Rollins College students on the effects of Juul.
So just breaking down some of our survey results here, we have the question, do you communicate with Rollins College students about Juul on Instagram? And the resounding answer was no. 90% of the respondents said no, 10% said yes, which is really interesting to think about because you would think that people who use something every day would talk about it in some way, but it kind of shows you that people who do use Juul end up kind of just allowing it to go under their radar without really thinking about it consciously on like a physical level, how it's affecting you. So that's interesting. We thought that was definitely interesting, and that correlation we saw coming from before. And then for our second question is, do you think, and this was just an interesting thing that we saw within our survey, it's do you think social pressures influence Rollins College students who use Juul? 70% said yes and 30% said no. I think this correlation is really interesting because we see that it's kind of a fad, and maybe like a lot of the people aren't really using it because they want to or because they need to. It's because it's like a fad and their friends do it. So I think it's interesting to see hard statistics that show that people think that like social pressure definitely influences people who use Juul, especially people who use Juul at Rollins.
So we concluded, based on our survey results, interview results, and also from our research, we concluded 2 points. The first one being Rollins College students do not communicate about the positive and or negative effects of Juul. So actually based on our research, a couple of resources mentioned that the young adults, they view Juul or e-cigarettes in general as a technological innovation. So they're safer, they're and more environmental friendly, and also more socially acceptable. And even the survey, also 70% are socially pressured to use Juul. Yes, there are benefits to Juuling, but they don't really understand, or they don't fully understand about the negative effects, the downsides of e-cigarettes. So actually, students, they're smoking 1 part per day now, which is really equivalent to 1 pack of cigarettes. And those are the people that did not smoke previously. And they're also not aware of Juul being a nicotine-based cigarettes for some of them, and they don't really realize how addictive it is. So there's definitely a lot of misconceptions and a lack of knowledge in regards to Juul. And then that leads us to the second point, is that Juul and e-cigarettes are perceived inaccurately by millennials. And that, again, stems from the lack of knowledge and lack of, lack of knowledge and also the exposure to, their friends, family, and even just people on the streets Juuling. And they just don't really, fully understand the downsides in regards to health, that aspect. And then another thing I want to mention is the social media aspect of it, particularly Instagram. So obviously not just on Instagram or social media platforms, there are obviously a lot of advertisements that are marketing Juul. So obviously their messages are going to be mainly about the positive effects of Juul. And when people see that, they don't do their research, they don't do their part in really understanding, what's the other side, what's the downside of Juuling besides, being a safer option, being a more environmentally acceptable option compared to a traditional cigarette. So, and again, social media platforms, they don't really facilitate conversations in regards to the negative and positive effects of Juul. So that's another problem that we saw as well.
So these are the implications of research. We're going to start with what we had during our midterm just to kind of allow us to compare and contrast. So we expected to use the information from our research to determine whether or not Rollins College students are communicating about the negative or positive effects of Juul on Instagram. We also were anticipating finding how the different communication methods and channels are used on Instagram and how that can impact Rollins College, how the Rollins College students perceive Juul. Upon completion of our research, we are unable to create a correlation between social media and Juul use, and we did not find that people communicate about Juul on Instagram. However, our survey did conclude that social pressure plays a role in Juul's rise to popularity. So we can see that was the most common thread that we saw, that it seemed like social pressure and other people using it, kind of peer pressure, was definitely the biggest influence in people choosing to use it, not for the reason of using it to be like a cigarette deterrent or a traditional cigarette alternative. They're just using it because it's like a fad and they think it's cool and their friends are doing it. And this is just like kind of allowing such a negative behavior to persist without even talking about the negative effects of it, which is very alarming to think about.
So future directions. So because we only interviewed one staff member from the Wellness Center, and also we had about 30 respondents for a survey, which is a relatively small sample size if we're taking consideration of the scope of our project, because it's a great number of people in the U.S. or let alone the world use e-cigarettes. So we would like to expand the scope of a project in terms of number of audience. So let's say, well, for this project we targeted Rollins College students. So in the future we would like to target a bigger audience. So maybe people in, we might involve students from UCF or USF, Valencia, just to allow us to better understand how Juul is being perceived by young adults or college students in the area, and then eventually maybe we can even expand on that and target even a larger audience. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go.
This thing recorded. I swear to God.
12:44.
Oh, good.